Hey everybody, welcome to the next episode of Video Game Collectors on Call. As always, I am DoctorGamerRetro. Today there's a very special guest, Edward Payson. He is well, I'll let you have him tell him about himself. So go ahead, Ed.
Sure. So I'm a filmmaker, first and foremost, and secondly, I'm a complete Sega Genesis collector. So as of the last 7 or 8 years, I've only been collecting Sega Genesis games. I like other video game systems, but Sega Genesis is my baby. It's the system I grew up with, and we'll go from there.
So when people look you up on social media, on Instagram, for instance, your name is an anti-hero production. That's also part of all of your films. Where does that name come from?
So growing up, I was really into the anti-hero, the Hercules. When it comes to comic book villains, Venoms, the Spawn type of villains. So it kind of just stuck. Some people don't understand it. I remember I went to a film festival in Utah, and this giant man who just got out of prison came up to me, and he's like, "Why is your company called an anti-hero production? My brother just got out of the Marines, and he is a hero." And I was like, "Yeah, man, I don't know, Greek mythology." And
Okay. So when did that start? When did you start with anti-hero productions?
So that was when I was in college. I developed a company, and that was around 2007 when I started my first film and had to come up with a name. I went through a bunch of different names, and it was a horror. I do horror films as well as documentaries. Before that, it was like Death to All Productions or something edgelordish like that. But we settled on an anti-hero production.
And then is that the same time around when you started collecting or for video games, or was that before that even?
That was before that even. So video game collecting didn't really start for me until 2014, 2015.
Okay. And back then it was kind of everything, right? But now it's more focused on Sega?
Yeah, so I honestly don't remember the point in which it started. I remember doing films and stuff. I did a film in 2009 called the Cohasset Snuff Film about a kid in high school who gets a camera from his yearbook club and films himself plotting out and carrying out the murders of 3 classmates and uploads it to the internet. Irrelevant to what I'm about to tell you about, but when I made that film, I had a bunch of hard drives the film was on. And at that point, I had been on, Etsy had just started, I think, and there was some guy who was selling hard drives that were customized to look like NES games, and I was a huge, Battletoads fan back in the day, so I had a hard drive for that film customized to look like a Battletoads cartridge, and then
Cool.
At some point, I was just looking at that cartridge, either, once that movie was complete or sometime in the near future, and I was like, you know what, I really want to play Battletoads again. And that's kind of where the collecting kind of took off, I think, is I bought Battletoads and I was like, well, what other games did I play back then? And I found my original Nintendo that I had growing up. It was still at my grandmother's house. Unfortunately, all my original games somehow either got stolen from cousins or whatever, lost in the fold, but I still have the original Nintendo.
If it was anything like me, my mother took them to Goodwill when I was in college. So that seems to be a common story, is the moms get rid of the games because you're not playing them anymore. But it's kind of sad.
So luckily and unluckily, my mom's a hoarder, so she doesn't throw anything away, ever.
Okay.
But at the same time, you never find anything again.
They're still in the house somewhere, maybe. You never know.
Yeah, but usually not intact. So I gave my mom the task one time when I moved to California to send my $3,000 DVD collection. You see Part J behind me. There's 7 other shelves in here. I gave her the task of sending them out, and I paid for everything, and she was sending them box by box, and all of a sudden the boxes stopped, and then one day I go to her house, I visit, she's in New Hampshire, and in her driveway is just 5 large, plastic bins filled with both my DVDs and filled with water all the way to the top from the rain. She just left them in the driveway to get filled with water. But yeah, so getting back to what you asked about, so yeah, it started with Nintendo, and then as things gradually, I started to get all the Nintendo games I played, I was like, well, honestly, it had a bigger impact on me, and there was a lot more games that I remember playing for Sega, because that was more my age range. Sega was around like the 3rd grade, 4th grade type of time in my life. And that's where I had like the actual fully formed memories, not just the snippets of playing the games here and there. So from then on, I was probably around like 2014 or 15, I just started collecting Sega.
So how many games are in the complete Sega collection for those people watching that don't know?
So I think the original set, there's like 702 games, but all the collector's apps, for whatever reason, like they still add like the aftermarket games and stuff like in there. So the number just keeps getting further away. So at one point I had like 90 games to go, and now I think I have like 102 or something like that.
Wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
you're doing all of them, including the aftermarkets or the extra editions or whatever it might be.
Yeah. I really got into aftermarket games in 2018. You know, before we went on camera, I was talking about how I did this movie Bits about a haunted Sega Genesis game, you know, starring all these like horror icons and stuff. And while doing that, I found out really quickly how hard it is to license like Nintendo and Sega games to be in your film, because 90% of this film takes place in a retro video game store, and we had an actual person whose only job it was to like get licensing for anything you could think of. So we were able to get like Coca-Cola, we were able to get like Modelo, we were able to get these huge brands, but then Nintendo was just like, absolutely not. If it's past the PG rating, you're not going to have our games in your movie. So thinking that we were just kind of like done for, I had the idea, I was like, hey, what about all these people making new games for old systems? Let me reach out to some of them. So I reached out to like 15 or 16 different companies, Megacat being the largest one, Megacat Studios, and a whole world kind of opened up to me, because they sent all their games, we used them for the movie, so you're basically seeing like this alternate reality where all these like aftermarket games existed in 1992 and on, as if they're like the real games. But then after the movie was done, I still had all these games, and I started playing them, and like just fell in love with them, because they really pushed the limits of the system with today's hardware being able to, or with yesterday's hardware, but with today's developers knowing all the different things they can do to really like push the systems to their limit.
What's an example of one of those games, if you can give people an example?
So the biggest ones I would say that are doing it is Watermelon Games. Watermelon Games came out with a few different things. First, they came out with Pier Solar, which ended up being like the largest, most all-encompassing RPG of all time. They came out in like 2014, I want to say. Don't quote me on that. But their follow-up game, Paprium, is they actually developed their own Sega Genesis cart to work in a regular Sega Genesis that's 80 megabytes. And also, the game has like 40 levels. It's a beat-em-up game. Very, very sought after to this day. A lot because of supply and demand and stuff, and Watermelon didn't make enough copies. A lot of people didn't receive their copies. That game is now, even though it's an aftermarket game, is like a $700 plus game to try and get CIB right now, yeah.
So if someone wanted to buy that, they'd have to maybe go on eBay or something like that, or...
Yeah, you can get it on eBay. There's a lot of people like selling it on Marketplace, places like that. But because it's a specially made cart, it's not something that you can get the ROM for or anything like that. So a lot of people haven't even like had a chance to play it yet.
Okay. So when you collect, are you only collecting Sega games that are complete in box, or are you just going after the cartridge itself?
That too changed kind of over time. At the beginning, I was just getting whatever I could get my hands on, whatever seemed like a good deal. I would say for the past like 7 or 8 years, it's just been CIB.
Yeah, I think the Sega games have a pretty, nice box. So for me, when I collect, I don't have as many as you do, but when it comes to Sega games, I do complete in box, because I think the box is so nicely made and pretty and looks nice on the shelf. NES and Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, those I don't really collect the box. It's just cardboard. It doesn't, to me, just doesn't strike me as that nice to put on the shelf, I guess.
Right.
What about some of the things you're missing? People watch the show. I'm trying to make connections between people. So if anyone's watching and may have some of these Sega Genesis games that Ed is looking for, what are some of the few that you're having trouble finding?
Well, honestly, the biggest one, and the one that I kind of have to make peace with that I might not ever get, is Outback Joey. I don't know if you know about that.
No.
So it's like how people will kind of say like, oh, stadium events isn't part of the the original set, and like they'll keep it
Right.
out of the Nintendo set. Outback Joey is like kind of that for the Genesis, where it was released, but it was released on this special Heartbeat software, which was a specifically branded Sega Genesis that was called like the Heartbeat system, and it has a special controller, and it's like an exercise game. So the only way
is this something you wear, like a heartbeat sensor, or what?
no. It's literally like a Sega Genesis rebranded as like the Heartbeat system.
Okay.
And it has like a special controller. The cart only will work in that system. So it's very like weird. Do you consider this part of the North American set? It is part of the North American set, but just the cart alone now goes for like $8,000. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, and there's only been like 2 or 3 known full systems to still exist with like the paperwork on the inside, all the connectors, and being able to actually play the game.
What about something that might be a little less expensive you're still looking for? Anything in that realm?
So my strategy when I started collecting Sega was, well, first off, I went to people who had already been collecting Sega, and I was like, where should I start? And all of them said, start with the renovation set, because that's the set that is the most sought after and just keeps going up like in value by like huge leaps and bounds every single year. Luckily, I was able to get that set. I went after that set first and got it, 6 or 7 years ago complete. Now I really don't have many of the high-end games that are left. It's mostly just like random sports titles and things like that.
So if anyone has a Madden 92 out there, Ed could probably use it,
It's more like the soccer ones, or like
Okay.
yeah, or like the ones that are not like a professional league, but like what's one? There's one that's like volleyball, and there's like another one that's like
Wow.
yeah.
Sports
I mean, some of the
so as popular as like football, basketball, baseball, like some of the other
right, like sports spin-off type games. Like I do have like all the Maddens and stuff in the white cases and that kind of thing. It's like few and far between at this point.
So what was the first set of games you called it? What was it? Collection?
The Renovation set. They're all by a company called Renovation. They're all very sought after. Every single one of the games, except for a tennis game, I believe, is like high 3 figures, and then like very good copies you just won't see around that often.
And they do other than sports games, right?
Yeah. Lots of stuff. There's like Valis, Cid of Valis, El Viento.
Okay.
Yeah, so like everything from like beat 'em ups to shooters and that kind of thing.
How many games are in that set? Do you know?
I mean, off the top of my head, I'm trying to look at this shelf.
give her.
I want to say like 18 games.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What about your rarest game you own? What's the rarest Sega game that you have?
Well, aside from prototypes, I would say probably the rarest Sega game that I own is, weirdly enough, Bible Adventures. It's become very, very rare over the years, and people used to laugh back in like the early 2010s, being like, "Oh, why would anybody want those?" Well, they're very hard to get because they only were available either calling in to like a special hotline or going to like Christian stores to buy them. They didn't sell them in regular stores. So and they're cardboard box, so to get them intact and just have them in general is pretty hard to do these days.
And is it the same as the version that's on Nintendo? Because I see the Nintendo version pop up a lot.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same one.
Okay, has like 3 different games, like a Noah's Ark adventure, like some Moses game, and then something else.
Yeah, and just like Nintendo, there's like 4 other games as well that aren't Bible Adventures, but they're almost as or not as rare as Bible Adventures, but there's like Exodus and a few other ones.
Gotcha. What about your favorite game that you own on Sega?
My favorite game of all time is Gunstar Heroes.
Gunstar Heroes. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just recently played that for the first time not too long ago. That's a
What do you
good
think?
game.
Yeah.
I liked it. I'm not huge into Sega in terms of the games. I never really got into Sonic. Sonic was like, for me, just didn't do it. Crash Bandicoot was more of a, cool guy, like mascot for video games. So I really liked Crash Bandicoot when that came around. What about the worst Sega game that you've ever played?
Man, worst Sega game I've ever played. Probably like Whack-A-Critter, or one of those like ones that were like the knockoff back in the day. They were like unlicensed, but they're around during the day, that are just very, very slow. It's like something that you'd play on like Atari or something like that, but for some reason it was released on Sega.
Is that the game that has the special controller? So there's some game that sounds like that, Whack Critter, where you have a controller and it's like a 3x3 grid of these circles, and when it pops up on the screen, you have to hit the one on the controller. I don't remember the name of that game, but I think it was either on Sega or Super Nintendo.
Yeah, I think that this one the one I'm thinking of is Whack Critter Dash Balloon Fight. It's like two games in one, and they're just like circus games, or sorry, carnival games that are just very, very low quality. Yeah, it should have came out on like a 8-bit system or like something like that.
Okay. So you directed a documentary about video game collecting, Rarity, game collecting in the modern era, right? Did I get that right?
Rarity, retro video game collecting in the modern era.
Correct. Okay.
Mouthful.
So a lot of people in that show are talking, there's certain parts, I've seen it, talk about what their kind of coolest find was, or like, oh, I was walking around a flea market and found this buried in a bunch of stereos or something. Do you have a story like that? Because you didn't share your story on the show, so I really wanted to know what your story was.
In the wild finds, I mean, a lot of times it just depends on what I'm looking for. As far as video games go, I mean, I found like full Sega Game Gears with like 6 games for like $40 or something like that. Games, not so much. I found a lot of like rare and old toys at flea markets for very, very low prices. Like even just like a few weeks ago, I found like the original Tommy Green Ranger from the original like Power Rangers line, just like at Goodwill for like $2 amongst like all the new toys. And then like, you know, a bunch of like Megas. I found the full Megazord at Goodwill. I found the full Dragon Zord at Goodwill. Like just all these, and a lot of like, Ninja Turtle stuff, like 90s Ninja Turtles, 80s Ninja Turtle stuff I found in the wild. But I don't really have a great game story. I have ones where like I came across something not knowing how rare it was, but it was things that I had bought on eBay or something like that. I have a story like that I could tell.
Sure, yeah, by all means.
So, actually, shooting for Rarity Part 2, which we're like still in production on right now, I had interviewed my friend Raphael, and he had a Golden Axe like paperweight that had some heft to it. It was very heavy, and it's the shape of an axe. And essentially, what he told me was like he got this along with a lot of other stuff from a Sega employee, and that these Golden Axe paperweights were given to the developers and the people that worked in the immediate office while the Golden Axe game was being developed in Sega of America. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. It was like an axe about this long, solid, it looked like solid gold, really nice finish. It said Sega on it, it said Golden Axe on it, and just solid metal. And I had never seen anything like that before, and by happenstance, like a week later after I interviewed him, I went on eBay, and I found another one, and it was on sale for like $60. But the thing about it was metal, so I was like, is this fake? Like, what's going on? It was just like a solid, like, metal finish. So before even like thinking about it or asking any questions about it, it was only $60, so it was like I pounced on it. I won, and then I asked questions after I won. And basically the guy was like, actually, it's the complete opposite. My dad used to own a company in Los Angeles called, I think it was like Gemstone Studios or something like that. And he would make custom metal things for companies. And this was actually the original mold that was put in there to make all the other ones. So now I have the original one.
Was his name Raphael? Was that his name? Did you go back and tell him that you got this?
Yeah. We did a whole like talk about it on camera, you know, to be included in the documentary, and got some cool shots of like his next to mine with like the Golden Axe games behind it and stuff.
Okay. In your documentary, like I said, I've seen it. You mentioned something about these games. They're called Game Factory games. So I had never heard about them before. Can you tell people kind of what those were and what their purpose was and what kind of happened to them? Yeah,
so Game Factory games were basically this company came to Blockbuster and went to Sega and were like, we can make it so people can get your games even if the games are out on the shelf. You don't have to have a physical copy of the game. What we can do is give you these flash carts, and this is way back in the 90s. So you get these flash carts, you can put whatever game your customer wants on it. They take it home, play the game, bring it back, we erase it, and put another game on it. It was something that only happened for 5 days in South Carolina. They tested it in a few South Carolina stores, and essentially problems they ran into that they didn't realize they were going to run into was how long it took these games to actually, download to the carts, being in the 90s and not being like instant like today, as well as the fact that like a lot of companies basically said no to the licensing because there was no way for them to track how much money their game was getting, or how basically no way to track like how popular their game was. They didn't like that. So eventually they just got rid of it before it ever started. And
I mean, it sounds like a great idea when you say like I can just show up and rent any game I want, regardless if it's and you got to think this is 30 years ago when you had to actually rent the physical copy. It just sounds like a good idea. So there were 2 colors, right? A green and a blue, and I did some research on this, and one of them just holds more memory. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the blue. So the blue one is more expensive and holds more memory. The green one has less, but they both do essentially the same thing. There's actually a black one too, that was just New Leaf, which is the main company behind all this, and that one wasn't used in Blockbuster or anything like that. But eventually, what they wanted to do is they wanted to make music and movies available like the same exact way. And video games was the first stop because they had the least amount of memory.
So you have the green and the blue one. If you put those in a Sega Genesis, will any game come up right now or no?
So one of them is empty. The other one, I believe, has, I want to say, the Flintstones on it.
Okay.
Just kind of the crapshoot with these is like you'll find ones that are just completely empty and then ones that still have the games on them and stuff.
So one thing I don't think I've ever asked anyone on the show, but being that you're a director, so you're in movies, you collect video games, what are your thoughts on digital media?
I mean, I think digital media is a great thing because it gave a lot of people kind of the opportunity that they probably wouldn't have if we just had film, around, because just the film itself for like a feature-length film that you would need to just shoot it and have like a, maybe 1 or 2 takes is like $250,000 just for the film.
That's fair. I think with video games, it kind of, at least for me, when I was a child, the coolest parts about getting a video game were looking at the back of the case or, reading the instruction manual. And I think you lose a lot of that now with digital games. But I think, definitely it's good for those who don't have the access and can really see some things that maybe they haven't before. So.
Yeah, and I think too, like for me, a lot of my movies, a lot of my money is made from the digital stuff now, streaming, etc. But we do have for like the hardcore people, like we did release like a really nice Blu-ray.
Okay.
With it's like a Nintendo style box with like a fold out poster that you get in like a Nintendo game and stuff like that. So it's all there, and I think the cool thing about moving into a digital revolution, if you would call it that, is the people that are there still that are releasing physical releases are really considering the collector now. And that goes for both video games as well as, movies and stuff, because nowadays it's so accessible that the only people that are getting it are the collectors. So they are putting in maybe they're going to put in a soundtrack. Well, maybe they're going to put in there was an aftermarket game that came out for, what was it? The Garbage Pail Kids.
Oh, right, yep.
Yeah, so I don't know if you know about this game. Like Adam Goldberg, the guy from the Goldbergs and like a writer, director in Hollywood, wrote this Garbage Pail Kids game. And the actual physical copy, they made it so it's like kind of like a chance pack, where basically if you order it, there's a chance you could get like the special bubblegum, pink one, or you get the blue one, and then like on top of that, like for the very early adopters, it actually came in like a garbage pail, like lunchbox and stuff. So the collector is.
I have a copy actually, and I haven't opened it. It's still sealed. Who knows? Maybe I have the pink bubblegum one, but I want to keep it sealed. So
very cool.
So. What about when you display your collection? So this is a pet peeve of mine. I see people post collections and things are kind of all over the place. Do you do it alphabetically?
I don't do it alphabetically. What I do is, so primarily the cases for Genesis are black and red. So I'll do like a red shelf, and then the next shelf will be a black shelf, and then a red shelf. So it's kind of like striped in a way. Yeah, and then they have the Madden games that are all white. So, sometimes when it's like necessary, I'll put a set together. Like I will put the renovation set together.
But do you think it's harder for you to find it? Like, if someone says, "Hey, can you find Mortal Kombat?" I'm just like, "Here we go." Like, but for you, do you think it's a little bit more difficult?
But I haven't had that happen in like years. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Have you played all those games? All the Sega games you own?
All of them, no. Quite a bit of them, yes. But the last time I actually got to sit down and actually like play games without any like worries and for more than like 15 minutes, it was probably in 2020.
Okay, all right. You talked about going to, I think, Goodwill and making, so I never have finds like that. Like, there's never a time when I go to a store, and I go to a lot of stores where I find something that's, like a holy grail or whatever. It's never happened to me. So where do you purchase most of your games? Is it online, like on eBay, or is there a retro game store around you?
Yeah, so there were a lot more retro game stores around when I lived in California. I used to live in Burbank, California. Last October, so not this past October, but one before that, we moved to Georgia. And since then, there's been less of everything. Less of the cool finds, less of the retro video game stores, etc., and things dedicated to that. However, the prices here just are way better, especially at like the Goodwills and the other thrift stores. There's so many thrift stores here, which is crazy. And the thing about here is a lot of places are either like by the pound, like if you're getting stuff, they'll just weigh it, or they just have like a set price, like no matter what, VHSs are going to be 99 cents, or no matter what, DVDs or video games are going to be like $2.50. So no matter what you get, you're not having to worry about that individually priced thing like I would have to do it. Even at like the Goodwills in California, you have games that were like I found like a bunch of sealed like Xbox games or sealed PlayStation 2 games, and they'd be on sale at Goodwill for like $39, even though it was Goodwill. You don't have to worry about that here, so that's kind of cool.
So yeah, I think that makes sense. I've noticed, because I do a lot of traveling and I always go to new stores wherever I go, and it seems certain areas have either cheaper prices or better selection, and it just kind of depends on where you're at. So, and that's kind of what I think you were saying, right?
Yeah.
So you do mention a lot of horror when it comes to either movies or games. Is that carry over into games too? Are you a fan of the horror genre, survival horror games?
Oh, I mean, I love the Resident Evil games and stuff, but I would say my top genre is probably RPG, to be honest.
Okay, yeah. I'm a big Resident Evil fan. I just played Fatal Frame for the first time recently. I actually just picked up, sitting over here, Rule of Rose, just to see, because I've wanted to play that. It's so expensive, but I just had to play it. So definitely horror, survival horror is one of my favorites.
Are you a Kuon fan?
What's that? Kuon? I that's like, what is that, like $1,300 now? I don't have it, have never played it, but I do want to play it. So if anyone wants to buy me a gift, I know we're past Christmas now, but Kuon, that would be the one. I do have it saved in my cart on eBay. Wasn't that was made by From Software, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so the people who made Elden Ring and all the Dark Souls games, they made Kuon. So definitely looking forward to hopefully checking that out someday. What is your best gaming memory? It could be from when you were a kid. It could be a week ago. Like, do you have one that stands out in your mind?
I do. So when I was in like second grade or third grade, Mortal Kombat 2 was the big rage. I played it for the entire year. And that summer, my cousins had came to visit for the entire summer and stayed with us. And I would always get to Kintaro in Mortal Kombat 2, and I'd always lose, end up getting game over and stuff. But then one time, literally one time, this is in my entire life, I got to beat Kintaro. Well, actually, I lost first, because I would always pick Scorpion, and I believe, and then I ended up picking Sub-Zero by accident the second time, and ended up beating Kintaro, and then, one round loss, one run won, get to the third round, I win. Then get to Shao Kahn and just, win every single round and beat the game. Never been able to do it since. Just that one time.
So after that moment, did Sub-Zero become your new main, or did you still go back to Scorpion?
I tried to try and emulate, trying to beat the game, but it never happened again for me. And my cousins were all there to see it too, so it was like it wasn't take my word for it type of thing.
Right.
So, yeah.
Gotcha. So let's talk about your documentary for a little bit. So now I've watched it. I watched it on Amazon. I think is that where can we watch it? I guess.
So there's like 18 different sites you can watch it on right now, or apps. The big ones being Amazon, Tubi, Plex. I want to say there's one it's on Fossum, and then a lot of different like little tiny apps that I don't even know the names of. They kind of
So
leaves and
I have
things
to give
back.
I have to give a shout out to Grant who plays games. So he's the one that got me kind of onto you and then onto your documentary. So Grant, if you're watching, thanks, man. But what got you the idea to make that documentary?
So honestly, it was a big thing in like why that happened, because at first we were just going to do this small little documentary with like four different interviews that were an hour long that we're going to somehow cobble together an hour of content from, just to keep busy during COVID, and with just friends too, because obviously with COVID they didn't want you, especially California, didn't want you like going to people's houses or anything like that. But then it kind of gradually grew just by word of mouth. Like we'd have someone, and then they'd be so excited about it, and they'd tell their friend who may or may not have been like a little bit bigger than them in the YouTube world and stuff like that. Then that person will want to get in it. Then they tell all their fans, and then it kind of blew up into this thing. It still is not as big as part two. Part one we ended up with 19 total interviews. Part two, as of right now, we have like 67 different interviewees. So
Is Grant in part two?
Grant is in part two. Yeah.
Thank God, he was hoping. So
And he comes in. He comes in at literally the first segment of part two.
now he's in part one, correct? But it's the very beginning, I think, and he's just reaching for a game on a shelf or something, right?
Yeah, he came with us for the original shoot at the beginning, where I'm buying some games, and he and a few other friends are there to get close-ups of them looking at games and stuff.
So mainly word of mouth is kind of how you got connected. Because there's a guy, I think, that was it Germany he was in, or he was somewhere in Europe, right? The guy with the consoles.
Yeah, and actually, funny enough, I just was editing his segment for part two last night. His name is Donnie Fillerup, and honestly, the cool thing about this was being able to find collectors who don't collect the normal things that everyday collectors do. I mean, like, collecting sets is great, but so many people who collect sets. This guy literally only collects consoles.
Wow.
Yeah, no games at all, just consoles.
So for people who haven't seen it yet, I mean, I don't want to spoil too much. It's not like a twist ending that I'm spoiling, but he has an all gold. Was it a Wii, Nintendo Wii?
Yeah.
That was supposed to be given to Queen Elizabeth or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
part two is the follow up on that, because he actually, as of now, has sold it to another high end collector and took the money, bought a house, but then also adds another huge grail to his collection that's like even rarer than the Wii.
We'll have to watch and see what that is.
Yeah.
So there's another guy on the show I want to talk about, and he presents well, I guess a couple people speak about it, but there's a topic among the gaming community that's quite controversial, I guess you could say. You might know what I'm about to ask you about, but graded games. So, what are your personal thoughts on grading games?
So here's the thing. I don't really care what other people do with their collection. And at first I kind of had like reservations about graded games. And then I got a few myself just to see what it was all about. I love how they display. I love that, peace of mind is kind of a thing now, where some of my higher end games, they're in a protective case and stuff. And I don't have to worry about my daughter coming in the room and accidentally ripping it apart, like, because she likes to just open video games or open DVDs and stuff and kind of go through them. At the time, to be completely honest, we had no idea it was such a loaded topic until we started getting like death threats and stuff in our DMs from after part one. And honestly, even like months and months, even years after the movie came out, another YouTuber who is against graded gaming would like find it, and then all of a sudden we just get flooded with like, we're going to look up where you live, you've ruined the community, and blah, 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 blah.
Wow.
When in actuality, it's an hour and 49-minute documentary, I believe, and maybe 13 minutes are dedicated to talking about graded games. That was
right.
And that was a huge topic in the community. And in the documentary, we have people who are against it as well and talk about being against it.
Yeah, no, you definitely present both sides. So again, for those of you who haven't seen it, there's a guy, I think he's a dentist, if I remember correctly, and you might know better than me, but I feel like he had at least 500 graded games of all different consoles and all different ratings.
Yeah, his name is Eric Nierman. He's known as like the dentist, and he's kind of an infamous character among like, anybody who points to anybody who like hates graded games, they'll use him as the example. Even when Carl made his anti-WADA video, Carl stole a bunch of like footage, behind the scenes footage from different YouTube videos that I shot. And gave to like different people who were in the documentary to use on their channels. And they're all of like the dentists and stuff. So he came from another hobby, so that's the first thing that makes people like, oh, he left a hobby to ruin ours or something like that. But he's like a super high-end collector of anything. I think he has like the most expensive Babe Ruth card ever sold. Like, if you think about all like the rarest cards in the world, he just like can have them in his hand and kind of go through all of them just at a whim.
He got speaking of WADA, you actually had the guy. Was he the CEO of WADA that was on there, or a co-founder or something?
Yeah, Dennis Kahn is in it as well.
Yeah. So I personally, when it comes to graded games, I don't. If other people want to do that, whatever. To each his own. I only grade things maybe similar to you. So I think that grading is for me, it's an authenticity thing. So I'm still learning what's real, what's not, and maybe this is wrong of me, I don't know, but I put a lot of trust in someone whose goal is to grade games, to say, hey, yes, this is legit, this is a real seal, this is, whatever it is. So for me, that's helpful. I don't get the grading of, let's say you just have a cartridge laying around of Super Mario Brothers, and you're like, I'm going to get it graded. Like that, to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like things that are historical, things that are, maybe worth a little more or need some authenticity to them, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I do urge people, watching this to watch that documentary because, it does present both sides. Like you said, it's only about 13 minutes of the whole almost 2-hour documentary, but I think you did a good job of kind of presenting both sides, so kudos to you guys for that, because it was definitely a hard topic to kind of bring up, I think. And as soon as it started coming up, I was like, boy, where are we going with this, so.
Yeah.
But like you said, back then, it probably wasn't as big of a deal as maybe people make it out to be now, right?
Yeah, and kind of what happened was the Call video came out like literally 2 weeks before we were about to release the documentary. So I then had to go in and kind of like re-edit, get more people talking about it, kind of incorporate this like video, which for people who didn't know, Carl Jobst released this video, kind of was like a scathing review of graded games and WADA specifically, and kind of had like it blew up, it went viral, and literally to this day, anybody who doesn't know anything about the topic will still quote Carl's video as if it's like 100% gospel. Yeah, which is crazy. Fun fact is, after he made that review, people then like looked at his Discord, and he posted on his personal Discord that he bought WADA graded games like after the whole thing, which was crazy. And for lots of money, like $500 games and stuff.
Huh.
Yeah, so, I mean, he must not be that, against it if he's buying it himself, but, to his own.
Sure.
Yeah, so part 2, we're staying away from everything graded games, and kind of all the different segments are kind of new segments in their own, so...
So the dentist will not make a return, or he will?
I mean, if he does, it's going to be not for a topic about graded games. A graded game might show up only because if people are talking about rare things, a lot of times people will grade them. Sure. Especially we have like a segment that's all about like people collecting specifically for the Nintendo World Championships and other champion type things. And if they have like, $100,000 carts, gold, Nintendo World Championship carts or controllers or whatever, a lot of times they'll get it graded just for the preservation of it. And the same thing happens with like prototypes. So I think the dentist might show up but first, second, because we have him talking about a graded Resident Evil prototype that he has. Yeah.
Okay. So, kind of following up on that with graded games, what do you think about restored games? Or I think some people refer to them as Frankenstein sometime. Let's say, you have the cartridge, you don't have the box, so maybe you get a box from the other, or especially with PS2 games, right? So it's not the original case that maybe it came in, but you have a separate case. How do you feel about that?
I mean, yeah, whatever people want to do. I think Grant does the thing with SNES games where it's all like aftermarket cases and stuff, and he's not the first person I saw do that. Actually, someone in the documentary did that as well, and we went, and that was the first time we had saw those. And I guess that's a kind of a normal thing for SNES people because the boxes are so hard to find.
Well, and I think, I had a guest on previously. His episode is uploaded, so Matty Newey, and he and I talk about kind of why is cardboard so expensive, right? So it's just a piece of cardboard. You're really getting it, or you should be getting it most of the time to play the game. And so, this inflation that's going on, prices are so high on games, and we put a lot of value in cardboard. So is there alternatives? Is there a way that you could still have a case that looks similar, that is cheaper? Any thoughts on that?
Like I said, it's kind of up to the person. If people want to have a fake cardboard thing on their wall just to have something to look at, just to, that's fine. I'm not going to tell anybody, kind of how to collect. I don't want to have, like, fake stuff on my wall. Like, I wouldn't. Yeah. Obviously, for Genesis, it's a lot easier to find the boxes for Genesis stuff. Would I collect fake stuff? Probably not. But again, to each their own.
No, I agree. Yeah. I do think that for whatever reason, we put a lot of value in some stuff like the boxes and the cases when the game is kind of, what's most valuable, I think. And I think there are also some sellers who are sometimes deceiving, right? So they will have a fake box and they won't tell you that it is, and they'll sell it for the normal price. And I think that also inflates the prices of what we have. So just something for buyers to kind of look out for.
Well, I do think that there's been kind of a revolution's probably isn't the right word, but basically, in other countries they kind of look at the boxes and stuff, especially like Japan and places like that. Like they look at the box just as important as the game because it's just all one piece together. Like the artwork that's in the box, the artwork that's in the manual, is just as important as keeping the game itself, in pristine condition. And I think that that's finally carrying over, to the Americas is, the whole thing is art, not just the game itself. Like everything about this, someone put time and effort into creating.
Right.
And that's why, people will go after variant boxes and stuff like that because, I have 2 copies of Power Rangers because they released 2 different boxes for Power Rangers. So, and one's harder to find than the other.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is just very important to make sure if you are the one selling that, just make sure you tell the person buying it, like, hey, this is a reprint box or this is not the original box. And oftentimes people do that, but I also find that sometimes people don't do that. So
yeah.
All right, I would like to move into a segment that I tried once to see how it goes. Just some rapid fire questions. I'm going to ask you a question. You give me the answer, a sentence or two if you want. And some of them we might have already discussed. But so what's your favorite game of all time?
Favorite game of all time would have to be Alien Soldier, which is kind of the follow-up to Gunstar Heroes, except it only came out. Yeah, it only came out in Japan. It has the same sound effects, everything like that. It's only one player, and it's kind of like Gunstar Heroes on steroids. Anybody who plays it thinks it's a PS1 game because they fit so much into the cartridge, but it's kind of the same mechanics. You have all the same guns, but you're this flying chicken monster alien. But the whole game...
Related to the story?
No. The only thing available, but the game is it's trying to keep it never goes or anything like that. Just game.
Okay.
Rapid fire to the next level. So.
On Sega, correct?
Sega Mega Drive. Yep.
Sega Mega Drive. Okay. All right. How about worst game of all time for any system?
Worst game of all time. You know what? I just someone said this last night. I can't relay it to just the system. To just a game. I'm gonna say the entirety of the Nintendo Wii.
Wow. Okay. You went big there. All right. So, hey, anyone watching, just, we don't hate the Nintendo Wii. It just, could have used some work. So, all right. Favorite console?
Sega Genesis.
Second favorite console, because I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. So, second favorite console would have to be the PS2.
PS2. Okay. What about least favorite console?
The Nintendo 64.
Really? Not the
Yeah.
Nintendo Wii?
I mean, if we already, yeah, I mean, I was gonna say Nintendo Wii, but then you'd probably tell me second least.
That's true.
I don't hate Nintendo 64. I will say that it aged, in my mind, it aged worst of any console of all time.
The Nintendo 64?
Yeah.
Okay. That is one of my favorites of all time. So, but we can chat about that later. All right. What about favorite video game character?
Favorite video game character? Probably like Leon from Resident Evil.
Okay. Not
Yeah.
Kirby, which is on your shirt. So
No, they don't have Resident Evil shirts at Walmart. So
they also don't have Kirby on Sega, right? To my
Right.
knowledge, there's no Kirby game. Yeah. Okay. All right. What about favorite multiplayer game?
favorite multiplayer game. I never really got into the whole all time. Yeah, I never really got into the whole multiplayer thing except for like World of Warcraft and stuff like that. So I'd have to say probably World of Warcraft.
Okay. And then favorite RPG, since you mentioned that's kind of your favorite genre.
Favorite RPG would probably have to be Final Fantasy VII.
Okay. And then specific to you, since you're a director, everything, favorite movie of all time.
Favorite movie of all time, True Romance.
Okay. Very good. So I only have a few more questions left. The one thing I want to ask, have you ever streamed like games or anything, or thought about doing that, or had an interest in that?
I haven't. I honestly, these days, literally have so little time. I have a 3-year-old, just turned 3 on Christmas Day, and since having her and since like 2020, I really haven't had much time to play games at all. Pretty much any time I have free time, it's not really free time. It's like on someone else's time. It's like, if I feel guilty because like if I go out to do something, it's my wife is watching my daughter and probably getting like having to deal with temper tantrums and stuff. So I just always feel bad.
Yeah.
I like watching streams every now and then.
Okay.
I hear like that's something that's like very Gen Z is they like to rather watch people than play themselves. They like to watch people play things. But yeah, like I've watched people on Twitch and stuff, but I've never thought it was for me.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's nice because they might play a game. Some of these games, like we talked about, are $1,300, right? So maybe someone's streaming one that's $1,300. So you are never going to play that game, but at least you can watch someone play it and kind of see what it's about. And I think it's good for that. So it's also good for just community and just chatting because I will stream. But honestly, most of the time I just do it to just have people come in and chat and we just talk about stuff. So I think it's good for that.
Yeah, when I watch some of that stuff, it's like you said, things that I'd never be able to afford and stuff like that. Like I don't know if you've had anybody on that was a Neo Geo collector.
No.
Anybody who doesn't know, like Neo Geo is like the Rolls Royce of collecting. There's only like 85 American titles, but the library costs like $750,000.
Wow.
With the average game going for the average game goes for between $2,500 and like $5,500.
Wow. I have not had anyone on that plays that. I personally have not played any of those, but yeah, definitely a good thing to look at if you're wanting to watch somebody play. Do you have any advice for people who might be watching and have just started collecting or have questions or just getting into it and don't even know where to begin?
Yeah, for sure. Nothing specific to Genesis, but like for anybody who's going to collect, I would say find people who have collected the same thing you have and look for tips and tricks. That way you can kind of avoid having to pay for the giant, when you only have a few games left, paying for games that have gone up like, 500% since you started collecting. And kind of, stay within your means, man. There's no rush to the finish line. Like, I've been collecting the same set for, close to 10 years now, and I know people who collected whole, sets, like whole Nintendo sets or whole SNES sets in less than, 2 months. So just whatever is not going to, break the bank and whatever you can do. No one's pushing you to do anything else.
No, I agree. I think you make that point in the documentary too. There's someone who mentions about how just finances, you have other stuff to be doing, so make sure this is kind of secondary to all of that. So I think that's definitely important, and I think a couple of people on the show have reiterated that as well. So all right, make sure that everyone follows, subscribes, likes, does all that stuff so we can get seen. The whole goal of this project is kind of like your documentary, just connections. Someone meets someone meets someone else. I'm all about trying to grow this community and get more people to know about other people, and so I think that's important to me. If you want to follow Edward on Instagram, he is an anti-hero production. Do you have any other socials or a website or anything?
So on TikTok, I'm an anti-hero1.
Okay.
The number one. I just started TikTok like this year or something like that, but we did have a few videos
Okay.
that will be seen like part of interviews from Rarity 2 that are in there that have gone like kind of like viral, like 500,000 views or whatever. Rarity 2 is going to have a lot more stuff that Rarity 1 didn't have. The whole idea was to like bigger, better, badder. Something that's never happened for me for like a movie or a documentary. Like we're going to be showing footage from lost games that have never been seen before, ever. Not even like like we have an M&M game that we have full availability to show the entire game on there. There's not even been a frame released of this game that was supposed to come out in like 2002.
Now, I had this on another show. Do you mean the candy M&Ms or the
No. Rapper M&M.
See, Downstab, there is a game. So I had a person who was talking about kart racing, and I thought he was talking about a bunch of rappers driving around on go-karts, but it was actually the candies. So I'm glad to hear there's an actual M&M game out there. What system is that for? PS1. Okay, now that'll be definitely cool to see. So make sure you guys all check out the documentary. It's called, I'm going to get it right this time, Rarity, Retro Video Game Collecting in the Modern Era. Got it. Perfect. And then the second one, which, do we have a release date for that yet or no?
No release date yet. We're moving right along. There should be a trailer. Again, I don't know when this is going to come out, but there should be a trailer 3 weeks from January 1st. So
3 weeks from January. Very good. Okay, so everybody make sure you follow Ed, follow myself, just support the community. Appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next time on Video Game Collectors on Call.
Thank you.